Okay, thank you so much. That was great. Okay, so I think it's time now. Let me just check how we're doing on time. Yeah, we're pretty good. To open to questions from the audience. We've got a really nice microphone here, the Cube. Let me just hand it over to whoever wants to ask the first question. I would just ask that you state your name and your institution, and please use the mic so that it's all recorded and we can watch this later. Who has a question? Dun, 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 dun. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't want to break it.
So I have a question for Liz. Uh, you have been filming and making documentaries all over the world. So what was the situation that alarmed you the most and makes you to make a stand on climate change?
Well, I think firstly my journey into this sector nearly started by chance because I spent nearly 20 years in marketing and running ad agencies before I moved into film, and I was asked to direct something in Antarctica and I said no. And my kids told me I was crazy and I should go, and I did end up going with some trepidation because I was not sure how I would manage the Drake Passage. And the trip over there wasn't too bad. And when I was in Antarctica, there were some things that I saw that really troubled me. And I also took 40 teenagers. It was the United Nations Year of Youth. So between the teenagers really wondering why we weren't doing something for their future and what I saw there, it pretty much changed my life. I think my first impact down there was when I was there late in the season and I saw a lot of baby penguins that were on the shore, and they were all squawking, I would say crying, they were squawking, and I asked why. And the scientists with us said that the breeding cycles were changing in Antarctica, and so that the baby penguins had been born quite late and they hadn't shed their initial fur coat, so they couldn't travel with their parents to the Falklands Islands where they go, so the parents had to leave them, and so that basically they had been abandoned and they would not survive. And there were many of them, and I asked kind of why, and they said, well, the climate is impacting even Antarctica and the breeding seasons, and it really troubled me to try and understand more about what was happening, and that started me on a quest to write and direct a series called The Tipping Points. And it was a year of my life in research, 2 years in the field and a year in post-production, so it's quite a long time. But I was very privileged to travel with Inuit hunters to the North Pole. We dog sled, and they told stories about how the polar bears were not well and they were not coming, in the seals, and they were trying to work out what it was that they were doing that was impacting their food. And you know, I tried to explain to them that it wasn't really their fault, but they took it quite personally that things were changing. And I think being in the Amazon and noting that there had been 2 massive droughts, usually one drought in 100 years, and they had had 2 in 10 years, and they'd lost nearly 3 trillion trees and they were still counting. And to see that the prediction with the Amazon rainforest was to see change in a particular corridor that would switch it to a savanna, and I really struggled to understand how that would happen. But then I visited one of the research centres, the Woods Hollow Research Centre, where every 2 years they were burning a part of the Amazon, a very small part. But after 2 years, the first thing that grew back was savanna grass. And so when the trees were trying to reseed, the grass had already locked the soil and they couldn't. And so you had this tipping point where suddenly the rainforest changed to a savanna. And so the things that I was reading about but not understanding, when I actually got to see them in action, I actually started to understand how quickly a climate system could change. And I think that that really propelled me to want to work more in translational science, but to bring it to people's attention through film, video, podcast. And I think that really my commitment has been, and working with the Earth Observatory of Singapore, has been to try and work with scientists to really translate the work that they're doing for the everyday person and for the community and for business and government. And I think that we as human beings really learn and understand more when we see it visually, and when we see it in more of a film or a digital video. We really watch it, we listen, and we understand. And because we've adapted to that more, I feel that we need to really press to work with our scientists to take not what we read as flat copy and a picture, but we need to bring it to life. And we need to have an engagement that people can really engage with what is happening, what they're seeing, and really understand why we need the impact of change. So I think what's moved me has been a collective over the last sort of 8 to 10 years. But it did start by seeing baby penguins that had been abandoned in Antarctica. And I thought, how would I have known about that unless I was here? And so I filmed it. And there have been situations where I have been such a privilege to be at. Another one I share with you very briefly was we were filming in India, and we were in the Ganges area, which is the main food basin. And I thought I was going to meet with 7 or 8 farmers, and it was a trip that was going to take an hour. It probably took us 4 hours because the traffic was terrible in the middle of nowhere. But when I got there, there were over 100 farmers, and they had all come to meet to try and tell me the story about the fact that the summer monsoons were changing and that they didn't know when to seed their crops anymore. And when they did seed the crops, the rain was so voracious that it actually was knocking the topsoil out, and how their life was changing. And in fact, basmati rice doesn't have a scent anymore that comes from India. And I hadn't known that. But it was being on the ground to record the stories that made me realise that things were changing and how important it is and will be to continue to record those changes and share them with everyone.